I'd like to welcome, with a big, warm Wild Wonder welcome, Sushma Hegde, who's joining us today to teach painting foliage. We are so glad that you all are joining us today. My name is Beth Kelly Galogly, and I'm the founding director of the Wild Wonder Foundation, which is hosting this class today. The Wild Wonder Foundation is dedicated to encouraging nature connection and conservation through attention, curiosity, art, science, and community. And that's where you come in, the community. You can learn more about our work at wildwonder.org. All funds raised from today's class support Wild Wonder and our many free and low-cost resources that help people connect with nature, including lots of educator resources, and we encourage you to check those out on our website. Thank you for your support and for helping to share the joy of nature journaling with others through your generosity. We are so grateful to today's teacher, Sushma Hegde, a self-taught artist and author living in Luxembourg. She is the author of the best-selling book, Wildflower Watercolor, which guides readers through her painting process and encourages them to appreciate the beauty of nature's imperfections. A few notes before we begin. I want to give a special shout out and thank you to Avea Moore and Anne-Marie Bergen, who are helping backstage. Because this is a webinar, your camera and mic are disabled. This is a 90-minute class, and we will take questions at the end. You can also use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Please share your class notes and drawings with us on socials using hashtag Wild Wonder Foundation, and you can tag us at Wild Wonder Foundation. And also feel free to tag Sushma as well, as I know she loves to see all of your work. I will now hand it over to you, Sushma. Thank you again so much for being here. We're so thrilled that you could join us today.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me here today. Very excited. And it's a very different kind of class that I'm teaching today. So I'm also excited about that. Yeah, thank you all of you for joining in. And thank you, Wild Wonder, for having me. It's always lovely working with you, with all of you. So I'm looking forward to today's class as well. Okay, so before we start, I just want to show you some of my paintings so that you get an idea of what we'll be doing today and how that will help you in portraying grass and foliage in your landscapes. So let me just switch my camera. Okay. So I have a few examples here just to show you what effect it has on your landscapes and how you can paint foliage better. So this is one of my recent ones. Okay, the thing is flipped, so let me just switch that. Okay. Yeah. So second, let me get it close. So you can see here, it's a landscape with a lot of green. There's no other color other than green and a bit of brown here. But it is important to know how to handle all of those greens, because even the mountain here, even though it's a little bluish, it's still a green. There's green here in the background and some trees here and all of this foliage here. And when you look at this in real, when you look at a landscape, you don't see like just bits of grass here. You see like lots of grass everywhere, even here. But how do you portray that in your paintings so that it's not overwhelming, so that you don't paint grass everywhere, but just show hints of it so that you fully, like when somebody looks at the painting, they understand that this whole area is full of grass. And basically, to show that, there are certain little tricks that you can implement, and I'll be showing that today. So, yeah, in this, when you observe, you can see that there are like little bushes here. And as you go here, the color also becomes like prominent. Here, you don't see the green so much, like the variation in green so much here. Whereas as you get closer and closer to us, you can see like different greens within that. You can see a warmer green, a cooler green, a little bit of a darker green. And even here, just adding these lines here gives this kind of texture and shadow within this green. And similarly here, you can see these grass blades here, few grass blades here, and next to this fence here, little grass blades. And even behind the tree, you can see some foliage here, but you can see that it's behind the tree and not part of the tree. So things like that, how do you do that? How do you manage to add depth to your painting? By varying the tonal values of your greens. So I'll be showing that as well today. And also adding texture, like how do you add different kinds of grass blades? What are the different ways to show grass? So a few more examples. For example, this is a monochrome painting. So there's just one color. It's just indigo in the whole painting. But you can still see there's foliage here. You can see even here that there's depth in this. Like you can see that the forest it's going through, like even behind, even though it's not very prominent, you can still see like leaves and things going on behind. And all of that, you're doing that basically by varying your tones. So it's just one color, but you're going from very light to very dark of the same color. So that plays a very important role. It doesn't matter if you're painting with one color or if you're painting with multiple colors. Knowing the tonal variation is the most important thing, especially when you're painting with watercolors. And here is another example. It's the same concept. While we did this with just one color, here we did the same thing with a lot of different greens, but the concept is same. So here you can see that even though I've not painted like every little stroke, you can see that this is a path full of grass here and here as well. And you can see the foliage here, and you can feel that it is, dense here and here. And like the light is seeping through that dense forest here. So again, that we do with a lot of wet on wet techniques. So you can see there's a lot of wet on wet play going on behind, just to show that behind these leaves, behind this foliage, there's still more foliage to show that denseness of the whole thing. And also we can also play with light and shadow by doing the same thing. So we'll talk about that as well. And another thing, I don't know if you can see it clearly. So you can see some kind of texture here for the grass, and I'll show you how you can do that, because all these little details kind of makes it not look flat. Basically, it makes the painting pop when you add these little details and little textures like that. So yeah, we'll talk about that and just a few more examples. This is another one, and here you can see a lot of foliage play that I'm doing here. So you can see that this stroke and this stroke is the same thing. So what I've done here and what I've done here is the same. It's just that this is at a distance, and to show that I've painted it small and it's a lot more bluer. The green is a little bluish to show that distance, whereas here it's a little more warmer and it's bigger, and you see the color variation also more prominently here compared to this one. So you're using the same strokes, but slightly differently to just show that depth, like that it's going in like that. And yeah, there's all different kinds of foliage here. You can see these grass blades here. You can see these little marks here. And this dense tree here, a different kind of foliage here. So yeah, we'll talk about all of that. What else? Yeah, I just have a few more examples here. Okay, another one here. And even in this, if you look close, you can see how the grass is falling on the road here. So these textures. So I think it's important to know these different ways of painting foliage so that you're not just doing the same thing, but varying it a little bit to add interest to your painting. And yeah, even here you can see that background, there's a bit of green. And again, we're doing a lot of wet on wet play here, which we'll also practice today. Another one here, just again, the same concept. When you're painting bushes or shrubs, you're using the same concept as when you're painting these trees most of the time. So again, here you can see there's like wet on wet clay before, and then on top of that, I've added like some random strokes like that. So it makes it look like it's dense, but it's not. Like, it makes it look loose in watercolors. Imagine if you had painted everything with this dark green, the whole thing in that dark green, it wouldn't show that depth and it wouldn't show that kind of fluid nature of watercolors. So to show that the transparency of watercolors, I've played with the wet on wet technique and then added bits of this darker and lighter bits here of different shapes, just to give that kind of variation in that. So another thing to keep in mind. Okay, so now let's start painting. Enough of this. I'll just put this away. And for today's class, we have a number of art supplies because we're just going to have fun and we're going to experiment and see, how each of these materials works for us. And it's not necessary to have all of the supplies that I have here. But yeah, it's if you don't have them right now, just watch and maybe you can bring them later, use them later. So what I'm talking about is, like, for example, I have a palette knife here today, and I have a fan brush, and I also have, yeah, I have this flat brush. So a few tools that I don't generally use. I also have a toothbrush and a twig. So this is from a hydrangea flower. I kept the stem. Um, the Yeah, a few other kinds of brushes here, mostly round brushes, but I also have a liner brush. So a liner brush is like a round brush, but it's just, this is longer. So that also helps to paint grass and grass blades. But it's okay if you don't have all of these for today's class. That's totally fine. I just want to show you what are the possibilities with all of these tools. So you can, keep that in mind. And if you want to try these different tools future, you can always give it a try. But for most of it, we're going to use a round brush. I'm using a size 8 round brush. And this is Escoda Versatile size 8. But I also sometimes use my silver black velvet size 8 brush. I love the tip of this one. But this one is a little blunt because I've been using it for a while now. And sometimes that bluntness actually helps. So I'll show you that. So I'll keep switching between these two. Both are size 8. Okay, let me put this away. Oh, I also have two other tools. So one is a spritzer. So this is a very travel friendly spritzer. So I just spray water with this. And I also have a sponge here. This is a natural sponge, and you can also make it fully wet and then dip it in color and use that for texture as well. Okay. And my watercolors, I use Daniel Smith watercolors, and I've poured all of them in these little pans. And this is a child-friendly kit that I use from Art Toolkit. And yeah, so I've put all of them here, and I'll use this. Put this away. And paper, I'm using Fabriano. I'm using Fabriano Artistico 100% cotton paper. And this is cold press paper, so it has that grainy texture to it. And this comes in a block form, but you can also buy loose sheets and then cut it on your own, or you can buy a sketchbook. But yeah, I like this size, so sometimes I use this block. This is 9 cross 12 inches block, but it doesn't matter what size you use today, because we're not doing one complete painting, but we're learning different elements that we can bring to our painting. And I have one sheet, so you can always use the paper on both sides. So I'll just use this because I was already using it. And let me put this to the side for now. Yeah. So let's begin. I also have a jar of water here. So it's a big jar of water because um, don't take like very little water, try to take more. Otherwise, you need to keep changing your water, because if your water gets very muddy and you keep using that, you'll see that in your painting. It gets, the painting is not so vibrant anymore, starts becoming dull. So keep changing your water, or take lots of water, or you can also use two jars, one for cleaning your brush and one for mixing. You can do that as well. Somehow that doesn't seem to work for me, so I stick to, using a big jar of water. And what else? Yeah, I also have some paper towel with me. Second. So I have some paper towel to wipe off some of the paints, and also keep one loose. You can also use tissues, or you can use a cotton rag, and keep one loose because we'll also dab on our painting in one of the um, steps. So keep one of them loose, but yeah, I use this as well. Okay. So making sure my brush is clean first of all. Let me move this so you can see a bit. Paint jar as well. Yeah. So there's already some green here, and I'm going to use that. So with watercolors, you can always reuse your paints, whatever has dried in your palette. And so I'm just making it wet. And maybe I'll just add some sap green to it. So what colors you use today doesn't matter, like what specific green, what specific brown or blue, whatever I'm using, it doesn't matter, because today we are here to learn different ways to paint foliage. It's not about, specific colors, but I will talk about the different greens I use, how I mix the different greens. But if you don't have the exact colors, that's totally okay. Focus on learning the techniques, like how to hold the brush or how to make those strokes. So focus on that today. Don't worry too much about the exact colors. Okay, so I'm taking sap green here, and I've added a little bit of quinacridone gold. So this is also one of my favorite colors. It's a very lovely color, and it also gives very lovely greens. When you mix quinacridone gold with the ultramarine, you get really lovely greens. Okay, so you can see I have a watery mix here, not too thick, quite watery. And I'm going to start from here. And I'm just rubbing my brush. I'm not using just the tip. I'm pressing my brush completely and just rubbing it like that. Just rubbing and leaving some white spaces here. And just rubbing it like that. And as I come to the side, I try to make some random strokes like that. See, just dropping in those colors like that. Okay, and now while that is still wet, I'm switching to a size 4 brush. So any smaller size brush, smaller than what you are using, taking a little thicker paste of the sap green and just dropping it here. Maybe mix it a little bit with the same mix that we had earlier. No, don't go. While I'm doing this while it's wet, while it's damp. So you have to be a little quick with this. You can see it's semi-dried here like that, which I don't want. I'm going back with my bigger brush. So you can see some unevenness in the green here, right? And we want that. We need it to be like a little bit of different kinds of greens that you can see within this. And now I'll go with a slightly darker green. So I'm taking some perylene green, mixing it with this. Just dropping it in at the bottom of some of this. So I'm doing it only on one side here. So let's say on the right side, just to show how light is falling, like, you know, light is falling from this side. So there's more shadow on one side. So basically you're trying to vary your greens as it's drying. So different levels of dryness or wetness of the paper, you're just playing around with different strokes. So as you can see now, these strokes are more visible than the previous one. Like you can see those individual strokes better right now. So this is one quick way to paint, you know, bushes or even like distant trees. So if you just add like a trunk here, this becomes a tree. But it could also be a bush, and you could also extend it. Like it doesn't have to be this shape. It can also go all the way like that. And the key is to play around while it's wet. So you saw that I added one layer first, and while it was still drying, I dropped in some slightly darker bits of green, and then I went for the darkest one. You can still go, once this fully dries, you can still add a few little highlights, which with a slightly darker green as well. But I think for now, this is enough. And yeah, so let's leave this alone. And we'll try a different way of painting some bushes and shrubs. So you can also ask questions or anything that you have, or just let's make it, you know, interactive.
Thank you so much, Sushma. This is wonderful. We're having some questions that we've answered so far in the Q&A, but folks are putting them in there and we'll reach out to you with questions
Okay, great.
during, and then we'll also save time at the end for questions.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so then let's move on to another way of painting these bushes. And this is it's a fun way of doing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just not worry about the shape at all. And if you didn't get a hang of this, of painting this, that's totally okay. We'll come back to it again. We'll practice it again. So don't worry about it, because it can be a little tricky for the first time. Okay, so I'm going to take some of this quinacridone gold, just add it here, mix it a little bit. And I'm just going to just go over like that. And then maybe add a little bit of blue. So I'm going to use some of this cobalt blue. Just allow it to mix, and you can see how it's becoming green right on the paper. Maybe a little more of the dark green that we have here. So make a weird shape like this, like a cloud shape. And then take your spritzer. Just take your spritzer and I just want to make sure it doesn't fall on this. And just spray some water on it. So you can see how it's spreading everywhere. You can also play around with it. And then what I do is I take my paper towel and then give it some kind of a shape. Yeah, and I'm not fully pressing, just very lightly like that. And maybe in some places you can fully press to, you know, give it a solid shape. You can see that white mark there. And you have to be a little quick with this. So we go back now with our size 4 brush. So any small brush, and then drop in some color while it's still drying. Maybe the blue. Just drop in the blue here. So just allow it to, spread. So I'm not making any particular stroke here. I'm just, like rubbing it through that. And maybe a little bit of that quin gold. And this could be a very lovely background foliage. So what I mean is, you would paint this closer to the distant mountains, and after that you would be adding like trees or something. So this will be your background, and that will give you like variation within your background as well. So you see like so many greens, so much happening in the background. So this looks like there are some yellowish flowers here, or maybe some dried bushes here and a few fresh green there. So it shows that there's variation of plants even at a distance. You can also pull off some of the paint like this. So you're lifting it off like that with your moist brush, and you're wiping it to your paper towel here. So I'm doing this. So take like that, and I put it here. You can also go back, and yeah, as it's drying, you can still like, play around with it a little bit. I especially like adding a little bit of blue into this because it mixes very beautifully with that quin gold. You could also add in a little bit of red, not something that we generally use, but you could also add a bit of red to it, just to give that slightly muddy kind of a look in some places. So yeah, this is another way. And like we leave white spaces here, what you see here, it just makes it look like there's a gap. So there's, you can see the sky or something behind that. So there's something going on there. So it's not just like one big blob of green there, but yeah. Okay. So you could like allow this to fully dry, and then over this you can like add a tree that is going further. So wait, let me show you what I mean. So for example, this one. Yeah, so you can see here a bit of that play going on here. Like I played wet on wet here, and you don't see it very prominently in this one. Maybe this is not a great example, but basically I could have done that here. So you see this background foliage here, I could have done that here, and then over that this tree comes. So it's not the prominent part, but it's still a pretty background. So you could use this for that. And you can also go back and add like little bushes there as well. And another technique that I really like to do is using a palette knife. You could also like score on this. So just holding it a little diagonal like this. And while it's damp, so you can see it's still wet. So you can see that shine, right? When I move it around. So you can see that it's still wet in this region here. So that's when you have to do it. You can do that, and it like slightly takes away the paint. And it's a little tricky to, to know when to do this, because sometimes it's too wet and it doesn't happen, or it's too dry and again you don't see those lines at all. But yeah, you can play around with that. It's better here than this region here, right? Because it's dried a little more here, easily getting those white marks. So basically it's taking away the paint, and every time I'm wiping the palette knife here. So I'm doing this, and there's a little bit of paint on that, so I wipe it off here. And then again, I go back, again, I wipe it. So that way you end up getting nice, lovely texture there as well. Do that, slightly vary the angle. And if you don't have a palette knife, you can also use a twig. For example, I could even use this twig and I could, do that. It'll be a little thinner than the palette knife, but it still works. So I don't know if you can see it. It's thinner, but sometimes you need those thin lines. So it works for that. You can also use the other end of your brush. So this is your brush, the other end. Some of them are sharp. This is not that sharp. Sometimes it works. Okay, this one doesn't work, but for this brush, I have a very sharp end like this, and you can see those lines. Let me get the camera closer here. So you can actually see those lines. It's a little difficult to show this on camera, but basically you get texture this way as well. See, when you look at it from far, you can see the variation in green, that right, and it looks very soothing. I like the yellow and the blue mixes when it happens within the paper. It looks nice. Okay, so let's move on to another way of painting foliage. Let me just sip a little bit of my tea. Before that, I've been talking quite a bit.
Thank you so much, Sushma. This is wonderful. You had asked us to give you a time check, and we're about halfway through the teaching portion, and we're saving a bit of time at the end for questions. Just wanted to give you that time check.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so another way of adding foliage is adding those little grass blades that we saw, which is in the foreground. And for that, I'm again taking my size 8 brush, but I might also switch to the size 4 brush. Let's see. I'm just taking some of this sap green plus quinacridone gold, and you can just add little lines like this. So try holding it like a pencil and just do that. And this is when a slightly blunt brush helps. And if you want it a little sharper, you can always go like this. So you get those sharp ends, but sometimes it's nice to just have something like this. So for that, this helps. So let me get it a little closer. And yeah, you can just play around like this, like a pencil, but you're just pulling it like that. And in some places, you can also do like shorter and longer. So very swiftly moving your brush. This takes a little bit of practice. That. And you can go back and add a little bit of the darker green. So I'm using this perylene green here. And just at the bottom, because always the bottom is a little darker because not much light is falling there. So it's a little darker at the bottom, and that adds interest to your painting. So yeah, you could do this, and you could go back with a tiny brush using this size 4 brush, and you could add little flowers, maybe a reddish flower. I'm taking quinacridone rose, and you can just add dots. Just little dots, and for this you need a sharp tip with your brush. And you can add little dots like that. So then it makes it look nice, especially in the front of your painting, in the foreground. And another thing you can try is I'm switching to the sharp size 4 brush. This is also silver black velvet size 4. And let's see, let's take this quinacridone gold. If you have yellow ochre, you can also use yellow ochre for this. And I'm just going to make these swift strokes like that. So it's a little dry, it's not very wet, the paint here. And so that's why you get those dry brush strokes here. And while you're doing that, you can also bend it a little bit. So something like this, you go up and you swiftly do that. So it looks like it's bending with the wind. So very swift movements. You have to be, free when you do this. And you can again go back with a little bit of green and just at the bottom, just giving it a slightly darker touch. So some are long, some are short in this case. So this is another way to add foliage, especially in front. And a liner brush also works really great for this. So this is the liner brush. Actually, I got this liner brush for oil painting. This is Princeton Aspen liner, but there are others for watercolors as well. But this one works really great because of its stiffness, I think. So let me show you. So let's say taking a mix of this green and brown here. So you can see it's a little dry. You can see the paint is not flowing in my palette, right? It's a little dry here. I'm taking that. And you could just hold it a little further away. So this gives you much looser strokes. It also helps if you're standing and painting. This makes it much looser as well. You can see how this goes, right? It makes it a lot easier. This is also great if you're painting like branches, for example, like this. The looser it is, the better it starts looking. Like that. It works very well for that as well. So it's always good to have a liner brush. And you can play around with this as well. So it doesn't always have to just look like this. You can also go back with some green just to, play around with this. What I like to do is, there's always a mix of foliage. When you see it's not just grass blades like this, there's like a bunch of like there's a shrub here and just grass blades are peeking out of it. So you can play around with that as well. So we're using two things. We're using what we did here and what we did here to paint something like this. So yeah, it's always fun to play around with this. And again, you can play around with color and add a little bit of pink to this. Why not? Green can be a mix of a little bit of pink as well in the green. Because yeah, nature has so many beautiful subtle colors that we don't notice so many times. And you can see how the quinacridone rose mixed with that green to give that slightly beautiful brownish reddish color. And again, we can play around with all the techniques that we learned so far. So again, I'm taking a palette knife like that. So it's a little too wet for this. So I'll wait for it to dry a bit. And till then, I'll add a few more grass blades. You could also try with the same liner brush. Till now, we were doing like this vertical. We were keeping it like perpendicular to the paper, but you could also try keeping it horizontal to the paper like this, almost parallel to the paper. And you could do that. So you get different kinds of strokes here as well. So interesting texture with this as well. And this is what I always tell my students, to always try to experiment with your art supplies. Like, don't just use your brush for just specific things, but try to, see what is the full potential of the brush. Like, what can you do with this brush? And remember one thing, that all of these brushes can take a beating. So you can like press it fully. You don't have to worry. Like you can do this with your brush. You get a different kind of texture. You do something else like this, you get a different kind of texture. So keep that in mind. You can like fully use your brush. Don't think of your art supplies as, very precious things that you have to be very careful with. They are meant to be played around with. So have fun with that. And another, yeah, one more we had, yeah, the flat brush. Okay, this also gives really interesting texture. I love this. So what I'm going to do is um, take a little bit of this quin gold. Yeah, you see, I use a lot of quin gold. I love that color. And so I'm keeping it a little dry. So you can see here how the paint moves. When you look at this, you know that the paint is not moving so freely. It's a little dry mix here, and I want it like that. And I'm also making it further dry by just wiping the brush once to my paper towel before going here on my paper. And you can see those strokes. You get those little lovely strokes. And I'm taking it upwards. So I'm going from down to top to get that kind of texture. And this works great. Like, for example, if you have a lovely landscape, or a spread of green you have, you just want to add some bits of grass here and there, then this works really well for that. You can see the drier it is, the strokes are also more prominent. I don't like that it forms a line here. So I try to go back and break that a little bit. So I change it up a little bit like that. So this also is, lovely, and you can try this with different colors as well. Okay. So, okay, we learned how many ways now? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 ways of painting. And I still have, yeah, I have 2 other ways. Okay, so another one is using a fan brush. And I use a Winsor & Newton Cotman fan brush, but you can use any brand, it doesn't matter. Just use watercolor ones, because the oil painting ones, they just become like, with watercolors, they lose their shape. So try to get a watercolor fan brush. And once you make it wet, it becomes like this, which is really helpful. So let me take a bit of this sap green. Okay, and I'm putting it here. So again, you can see how dry it is here. You can see almost the strokes in this, right? So you can go here and paint like this, but you don't see the strokes like so prominently. I'll just add a little bit of water to this. What I like to do is I turn my paper 90-degree. Then do this. So this gives lovely texture here. You see the difference between this and this? So this makes it look much nicer, much more like grass. But you can experiment. This is like, I just figured it out when I was playing around with the brush. So always, try different things. You can also just take like not the whole brush, just the two of these and just play with that as well. So you see how you get a different stroke. So always play, play, play. And let's see, I have not played so much with this brush. So let's see what happens. We fully do this. So, okay, you get very different kind of texture, but maybe it's useful for something. So something to keep in mind. Okay. And another way is with the flat brush. So I'm coming back to this. So with the flat brush, we did this, but there's another way you can use the flat brush. So let's say I'll take a little bit of cobalt blue. And so instead of using it like that, you can also use the thinner size, the side of the flat brush. So you can just do like these lines, similar to what we did here, just these lines like that. But maybe I add a little bit of green now. You can just go here and actually let me add some quinacridone. You're just making those bushes, but you also have this kind of lines like, the stems of those plants. If you go up close, you would see those individual plants. So it gives you that kind of effect as well. So, for example, in this case, we added the grass blades over the bush, whereas here the bush is there and the grass blades are down. So think of it like that. But basically, this looks like, certain stems, and the white gaps between them looks like you can see between those plants there. So it's not just one big block. So yeah, another way to paint bushes. Yeah, you could just go on and on with this, just like that. Just little strokes. And in some places you do that. And some places you take just the tip of it, not fully like that, just that. So you're doing just this, just little marks. You see that, how tiny it is? So you could make it tiny. So keep varying that. You make it really tiny and then you draw longer ones and then tiny ones, and always go back and maybe change the green up a little. So within that, while it's still wet, drop in a little bit of a darker green just at the bottom. So it just gives it more interest like that. Okay. And now we can just try all of the techniques that we used in in a landscape. But wait, there's one more technique that I wanted to share. So let me take more paper here. And let's practice this again. So one second. Sipping on my tea every now and then. Okay, so another thing that you'll need to know when you're painting foliage is also painting these individual leaves. So, for example, in this one, just want to show you how you can paint something like this. So this is also part of foliage. It's not just these dense ones, not these very dense ones as well, but something like this or something in between this and this. So this is my favorite part. And Let's mix in some ultramarine. So you can take any green you want, but I'm just while teaching this, I'm also trying to show you what are the different possible greens that you can mix. I'm taking quinacridone gold and ultramarine. It's a very lovely green. Okay. If you have greens like emerald green or viridian, you can also mix that with quinacridone gold or some form of orange if you have, and you'll get a nice green. Okay, you can also do like just little strokes like this. I'm taking the size 4 brush here, but you can also use a bigger one, not a smaller one. Try to use a bigger one. And yeah, just little strokes like this, like I'm scratching on the paper, just here and there. And these white spaces are important. So you can see that there are like blocks of paint here, which is like, this is a bigger block, but there are smaller blocks here. So as you go outside, try to add more of these smaller strokes, whereas as you're inside, it's like it's more denser here. So you make these bigger marks inside. And it's the same thing when you're painting a tree, for example. So let's say, it's a branch is coming out like this. So it's outside the paper. Let's say it's like this. Always try to, keep it. So as it closer to the tree trunk, it's denser like that. But as it gets out, try to make it smaller, like more white spaces. You see that? You see the difference, and makes it look more natural, like there are like these individual leaves swaying in the wind, whereas as it goes inside, it gets denser and denser. And you have a tree here. So similarly, we're doing the same thing here, just that it's like a bush here, and I'm going back and adding little drops of a slightly darker green. And I'll take a little bit of burnt umber. Just, let's say there's a tiny bunch of trees here. I'm just adding those branches here. So you could do this as well. And let's say you have a bush where the leaves are, drooping. And for that, you could, again, I'm taking the size 4 brush. And you could do this. So it's all about the brush strokes. So how you're moving your brush. So you could just go down like this. So see those strokes there? And again, you have a different kind of foliage. And always go back so that it's not just one green. Even within these little elements, if you just drop in a little bit of a darker green while it's still wet, it adds so much interest. And you're not dropping that color everywhere, just in some parts. And you can see how that transforms it, right? Similarly, you could also do the same thing. Just remember that these are all like different kinds of hand movements, and then it's the way you're moving your hand that matters the most here, because in the end the greens are all similar. You're adding like lighter and then a bit of darker green, and just things like this. Just strokes like this can also add, make it look like grass is coming out like that. And it gives kind of like a whimsical approach to it as well. Could do that. And yeah, when you're painting these grass blades, you could also, so I'm going back with my liner brush. As you're doing this, you could also go back with a bit of green and just add like dots here. That also makes it add some kind of whimsy to it, which I really like. Yeah. Okay. So now the important part. Okay, now let's say we have a landscape, and I'm quickly going to paint that landscape here. So I'm taking a big thick brush here because I want it to be like a big landscape here. And I'm taking a size 12 brush and take a little bit of the blue first. And I'm just going to add like a mountain here. Maybe drop in a little bit of purple, because why not? And I'll also drop in a little bit of green here, whatever green was in my palette. Just allowing all of them to mix together. And then now I'm going to take some of that sap green, maybe a little bit of yellow as well. Okay, that was very bright yellow. So I'm mixing some green to that. And just paint. Now, so let's say this is our landscape, but we want to add interest to it. We want to add depth to it as well. So I'll just show you how you can do that just by playing around with what we learned today. So I'm just adding it like this because I don't want it to be just a box. So I'm just making these strokes here, which also helps to show like grass and, like there's a path there. So let's see. Right now, this looks flat, right? Like there's no depth in it. So we'll see how we can add depth to this, but we have to wait for this layer to fully dry. And while that is drying, I just want to I just want to practice what we did earlier, which was that first one, this one. I'm not very happy with how this looks, so we'll just try to do that again. So I have some space here, so I'm going to use that. And I'm going to allow this to fully dry now. And just to repeat what we did earlier, I'm going to take a little mix of different greens here. And take a little bit of this blue here. And just using my brush like that. So I'm just using a wet, like it's quite wet here. Let's see that. Now using my size 4 brush, take a little bit of a darker version of this. Just dropping it in that. While it's still wet. Okay. And then going with a much darker green. I'm using some perylene green here and thicker than before. I can just drop in some of these strokes like that. Yeah, that gives kind of an effect of a dense foliage. Then this could also be a tree actually. So look good. So let's say just take some burnt umber and we could make this into a tree. Yeah, that's a nice tree. So yeah, it's the same technique that you can use. And yeah, this takes a little bit of practice, but what I've done here is I've tried to keep the darker bits only on one side and not everywhere. Like, the light is falling from here and just shadow of that whole thing is just falling there. So you could do that. Yeah. So this is, yeah, almost dry. It's a little damp. I want it to be fully dry. I think it's fine. We could, paint. Just let me sip on my tea a little bit.
Letting you know as well that it is almost 5 after the hour, which means that in just a few minutes, then we will, if it's good timing, we would love to go into questions. People are utterly enchanted by your class, and we're seeing lots of praise and enjoyment in the Q&A. And
Oh, I'm so glad. Okay, thank you. Yeah, sometimes it's like, you're just talking and teaching, you don't realize what's going on. And I've been wondering, are people getting a hang of it or not? So it's good to hear that people are enjoying it. So let's try to finish this quickly. It won't take much time. And I just want to show you, like, remember how it looks now, right? There's no depth in this. And let's see how we can add depth to it. So I'm taking whatever green I have here. Let me keep it here so you can see my palette. Okay, this is slightly damp. I wish it was a little more dry. So always like touch your paper and see if it's the same temperature as where you've not painted. So here and here, it's generally a little cooler when it's wet. So I can feel it much cooler here. But okay, I think this one, at least this region is dry. So I'm going for that. So I'll take a little bit of ultramarine blue. So always for your distant bushes or distant mountains, try to use more of blue. And try to notice this when you're outside, you look further away, the mountain usually looks blue, even though it's like made up of, tree, like there are lots of trees or even forest on that mountain, it still looks blue. And yeah, you can use that for in your paintings as well. So I'll paint some bushes here. So I'm going with a bit of a bluish green here, but you have to remember to keep it a light tone. So, okay, that is something I think we didn't discuss earlier. So what is tonal variation or tone is so let's say this is perlene green and this is the color, okay? But you add some water to it and you can make it lighter. So it's like adding white to a color to make it lighter. When you do it in acrylics or oils, you do that. But with watercolors, you don't need white or black. You can just use water to make it lighter or darker. So you can see this is a much lighter version of the same color. And you can go much lighter as well. So let's take a little bit of it. It's already water here. And you can see how light you can get with the same color. So this doesn't mean it's not a darker color, like perlene green is darker, right, than sap green, but it is the tonal variation of that color. And so when you're painting something behind, try to make it a lighter tone of the same color. So it's still a dark green, right? It's still a bluish dark green, but it's a lighter tone than what you see here. So you're just mixing more water, making it a little more watery, and you're using that. So I'm just putting those little strokes that we practiced earlier. And these are your distant bushes. And let's say there's like a field or something here. Something's going on. Just adding in hints of green here. So it's somebody's farm here. And they also have some bushes and some trees which look like bushes to us from far away. Actually, that's the view I see from my window here. So there are like farms and fields around me, and there are these little random trees, solitary trees in between, and which from a distance looks like a bush. So some are a little darker. So again, you're using those little strokes that we talked about earlier. And you're just varying the green a little bit. And doing sometimes just these lines also adds texture to it. Just like when we're painting water, you just add lines to show those ripples. And then for like a mass of green, you can add those to show that there's grass there. Okay, so you can already see there's some amount of depth in this, right? Than what we had earlier. You can also go back and add a little bit of like darker bits right there. Maybe not so dark. So I'm just taking some of it from there and using it here. So just to show some variation within this. That again adds to the distance and depth of this. And now in front here, we can add a bush like what we did here. And I'm going to play around with warmer color because as you get closer, it gets warmer. Maybe a little bit of the blue. See how the blue became green because it's mixing here with the quinacridone gold. Just taking some water and helping that yellow mix in with that because I don't want it to look very yellowish, just hints of that. Just little dots and lines. And we could go with our liner brush and take very dark green almost directly from your palette. And you can just add like a really long lines. Just be bold with this. You know, if it goes wrong, it's okay. So in the end, it's just a painting. You can paint again. So it needs a little bit of boldness when you're painting, especially with this liner brush, because you don't have much control, especially when you're holding it further away. But yeah, just remember it's only a painting, and if you ruin it, it's fine. You can just paint it again. And yeah, that takes off the pressure. And this is something that I have to learn as well, because I say that very easily, but sometimes it's hard for me to implement the same thing. So yeah, something that we always have to keep in mind. And you can see how this adds, you know, depth in your painting. Now you can feel that it's going inside there, right? And you could also take a palette knife and add more texture to it. So I'm just pulling and wiping. So it has to be a little wet for you to do this, but not too wet. It has to be a little damp. So finding that right time when you can get these strokes is a little tricky. It takes some time, but yeah, it's doable. And I can also add with the thinner side of my brush and also try these thinner ones of the same thing. I love doing this. It's such a stress buster, you know, just keep flicking. And I like how this turned out. You could also, if we have time, I think we have just a few minutes. So I'll just show you what you can do here. Now, again, from what we learned, again, I'm taking my flat brush here and I'm taking a thick paste of Quin Gold and just wiping it off to my paper towel first to get that texture. And you can go back and from bottom to top. Maybe a little bit of green because suddenly it looks like a very different color. I want that smooth transition between colors. So maybe some longer ones here closer to this. Oh. So let me know, what do you think about
This is so
this?
fun. We've had such an avalanche of wonderful comments from folks
Oh, I'm so
enjoying the
glad.
class. Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm almost done. Just a little few highlights here. Just to, have that smooth transition here. So I'm just filling it here as well. It's not like, just grass plates are here. They're going all the way from here to here, increasing, like decreasing in height. It's bigger and then it's further away. Yeah. So you can see how it was. You remember how it was first, right? It was just the mountain and just that green mass. And then we went and added this. And you can see how it adds that depth. You can also add a few more little strokes here. And you could also, I'm just maybe going overboard here, but just to end it, you could also go with taking a bit of burnt umber here and just go be bold again and just add a tree here. Just like that, and some branches. And you can always go back and add some foliage like what we did here or here. You can also add that, but I think I'll leave it like this. And
Thank you
take my
so
liner.
much.
Yeah, I'll just finish this.
Sure.
And I'm taking my liner brush just to make these lines here, just to show the thinner stems here. Branches. I could go on with this, it's so much fun. So yeah.
Do you feel ready for some questions? We have about 12 minutes left
Yeah.
in class and we have quite a few questions. We've
I'm
really
ready for questions.
great. We've so enjoyed this beautiful demo with so many fun techniques, and folks are just loving it in the Q&A. So thank you so much. We also want to remind folks that Sushma created a really fun list of nature journaling and painting prompts for this whole month. So if you didn't know about that, we'll pop that in the chat and you can find out about that on our homepage at wildwonder.org. So we have a lot of different questions. I tried to group them into kind of categories. So one, if you could talk about the order of applying color. Generally, are you always painting from light to dark? I notice sometimes you do pop in later and add darker, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let me switch my camera, or let me keep this so if somebody is still painting,
Sure.
they can.
However you like.
Yeah, I do start from lighter and go to dark. It just makes life a lot easier because with watercolors, adding a lighter color over a darker color is a lot harder. So when you paint light, you always have the chance to go back and add a darker color to it. So for example, if I'm painting this landscape and if I was going to paint the sky, I would start with the sky with the very light blue and the wash of green here, that what we did here, and a lighter mountain like that. And then I go for the darker bit. So you can see this is darker than this green and these are darker. So the darkest I keep for the end. For example, this is the darkest and this is the darkest. So yeah, that always going in that way makes it a lot easier to correct your mistakes with watercolors.
Great, thank you. We also had a lot of questions about water. How wet is your wet palette? If you could talk a little bit about that. You said at the beginning going from a wet palette, and how do you wet it? Can you talk a bit about that?
So when you're using watercolors, always try to make the paints wet first. So I use a spritzer and spray all over it. So it takes a few seconds to become easier on the brush.
Mm.
And so when I'm mixing the color here, this is like, it should be, if it's very flowy like this, so you can see how well it flows, and that you can see it moving, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's like a really wet palette, and that's what you use, for example, for the wash that I used here, or for this green wash, I use this, or sometimes even you make it much more wet. But you should remember, as you make it wet, you're adding more water and less pigment, so it also is lighter. So for the lighter colors, you use
Mm-hmm.
a lot more water. And as you, for example, this here is a slightly thicker consistency compared to this. So yeah, so for that, I add lesser water. So as you go, you keep adding more of the pigment to this, and as and when you add just a little bit of water to that, so it goes from a very watery consistency like this to something more of a paste, and then something really thick where you can see your strokes. For example, if it's like very thick like this, you can actually see your brush marks on it. So that makes it like very thick, and sometimes you can directly take it from here as well if you want it really thick. So yeah, you it takes a while to figure this out. But with practice, it becomes very natural. You don't even think about it so much. So yeah, it takes practice, but try not to look at it so much as, okay, it has to be this much water to this much. Try like making a mess. Try painting and like filling pages with just seeing how much your brush moves, like how much water it takes for your brush to move freely, and sometimes it doesn't move so freely and you get those dry brush strokes, and observe how much water you had put in your palette to get that. And that over time, yeah, that becomes natural. It just becomes a part of it. You don't even realize you're doing all of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was really helpful. A couple other water questions. Do you usually let layers dry as you're working, or do you do more wet on wet? And then folks wanted to know if you use a blow dryer sometimes, and if so, do you feel it affects the painting differently than letting it air dry?
So I don't paint a lot wet on wet. When I'm painting landscapes, I do paint wet on wet, like you saw here, or here I how I change the colors within this, and it was all wet on wet. I do that, but when I'm painting florals, I don't do so much wet on wet. It is more dry on wet, but maybe to add a few highlights, I do wet on wet. But yes, I do use a hair dryer very frequently, actually, because I don't have the patience for it to wait for it to dry, because I'm completely in the zone sometimes and so excited to paint. And so I do use a hair dryer. Just be careful when you're using a hair dryer. Keep it at a distance, and then it'll not affect so much. If you keep it too close and put it on like high heat, that can damage your paper. And yeah, I've not seen any like dullness of paints because of using hair dryer. It has always worked fine for me. So
Okay.
the whole Wildflower Watercolor book, when I was painting that, I used a hair dryer constantly because I had to show every step of like every stroke that I was doing, and I had to dry one to start the other one. So yeah, I used the hair dryer a lot that time as well.
Good to know. That's great. Many people are super excited about your palette. And could you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about what colors you chose to include in your palette and what are your favorites?
So I have a full list of this. So if you go to my Instagram link on in my bio,
Oh,
I
great.
have
Okay.
something called, yeah, art supply. So I've made a PDF which contains everything, all the colors I use, what palette I use, what brushes I use, what paper I use, and I also have recommendations for beginners, what they can get, which is like more affordable. For example, Daniel Smith paints are quite expensive, and if you're just starting out, you can try different ones. You don't have to go for these as well. So yeah, I have a list of all of that, and I use those exact colors. But sometimes I try to, mix it up and experiment with a few other colors. But it's mainly and I don't even use all of these colors. I'm thinking I have to reduce this. I don't need so many colors. We always think we need a lot of colors, but I think I end up using like 9 or less than that colors. But basically, what I use the most is sap green from Daniel Smith, then quinacridone gold, and ultramarine, and quinacridone rose is one of my favorite colors for all of my florals. And quinacridone rose and ultramarine makes a very lovely purple. So you can use that. So I don't need this purple. I have a purple here, but I always mix it with these two colors, so I can remove that. And I keep two yellows. So one is a cool yellow. This is lemon yellow, and I have a warm yellow, which is New Gamboge, which I also use a lot, and two reds. So this is a warm red. This is Pyrrole Scarlet and Quinacridone Rose. And yeah, mainly that and some blues and some greens. So I generally keep only two greens, which is sap green and perylene green. The rest I mix as I go. As you saw in today's class, I added a lot of quin gold or a lot of ultramarine or a bit of cobalt blue. So I keep mixing green with having a base green, and I mix with that some form of yellow or some form of blue. And yeah, so those are the earthy colors that I use. I also have some yellow ochre, and I have this buff titanium, which I've never used. I have to take off all of this. And yeah, I have burnt umber, and I have, I think this is sepia or indigo. I don't remember. I have to check. So basically a bit of darks and a bit of the primary colors.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Um, some folks, I guess in the supplies you had mentioned a twig. Would you like to, in the last couple of minutes, demonstrate what you do with a twig painting with twigs?
Yeah, you can use any kind of twig. I just have this accessible right now. And it's important to have your paint in something like this so you can dip it easily. So this is watercolor inks. So you can just take your watercolors, add lots of water and make this as well. I just use this and use this paper here. And this depends on the twigs that you're using. Sometimes it gives these lovely textures. You could also use it like just to scratch, do that. And you can also use your nail. I cut my nails, but I try. But yeah, you can do that over this as well. So yeah, something that if you have thinner twigs, you will get more. Basically, it's for, adding texture to whatever you're creating. You can also use a toothbrush similarly with the same thing. Let me quickly show you that. So I've just made this wet and dunk it in this. And you just, like what we used to do when we were kids, right? The same thing. Just spray it like that. Also adds texture to it. And yeah, even a sponge, the same thing. You need the sponge fully wet. So I've already made this wet. And then you can just take a bit of this and you have a bush there instantly. This is another thing that you can do. Okay. So any other question?
No, I think we are about at the end of class, and I just want to take a moment. If Avea, you could bring us on, and everyone wants to see your beautiful face as well, Sushma. Several people have said they miss seeing your smiling face during class.
Oh,
So
that's
if
so sweet.
Avea, you could pin us both, that would be great. And if Sushma, you could come back. There you are. Hello. And I will start my video as well. I just want to say a big, big thank you so much for this wonderful class. Your passion and playfulness in painting is so contagious, and I really, really appreciate you sharing that with us today. I just want to remind everyone that Sushma did create this beautiful list of prompts for the whole month, so you can start today, or you could go back to the beginning of the month and just give yourself a 30-day challenge of different painting prompts from Sushma, and you can find those on our website at wildwonder.org. And I just want to say again that all funds donated today will go towards supporting our Wild Wonder Foundation programs, which we have a lot of free and low-cost resources to help people connect with nature. We want to help people fall in love with the natural world and take care of the natural world. So thank you so much for your generosity in supporting our work, and thank you, Sushma, for sharing your skills and experience and passion and joy with our community today. We will be emailing you, everyone here, a link to today's recording, and we'll include the chat and some other resources in that email, and you'll receive that by the 27th of May. We will also send you a survey, so we'd love to hear what other classes you might like to have with us. And please share your drawings and paintings and notes from today's class on socials and tag us all, Sushma and Wild Wonder Foundation. I know we'd all love to see what you've been up to during class and what you create afterwards. Lastly, and if you enjoyed today's class and you haven't made a donation, or if you'd like to make an additional donation, you can do that on our website at wildwonder.org/donate. And I think they also put that in the chat as well. So thank you again also to Anne-Marie and Avea, who helped behind the scenes, helping with all of the questions and the tech. Really appreciate your support today. And again, of course, a big thank you to Sushma. So appreciate your class today. It was so fun and beautiful, playful and encouraging, lots of great ideas. So thank you so much.
I'm so glad, and thank you so much. It's such an honor to, be a part of this with you guys. It's really an honor, and it's so well organized and so beautifully done. And I was seeing how you guys were answering all the questions that were coming. It's not easy. I mean, you have to listen to me and then answer those questions. So thank you so much for doing that.
You're so welcome. We're happy to take the pressure off you and just let you do your special magic. Yeah. We want to try to let you just shine in your wonderful way and take care of the rest of that stuff behind the scenes for you. So really glad that you could do this today for us. Thank you again so much. And thank you everyone for joining us. Really appreciate you being here. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.